Hi, I'm Lindsay with the Saskatoon Public Library, and I'm here to share an adult story time with you today. I'm here in my home on Treaty 6 territory, and the book I am going to share with you is called Book 1, Pewter Angels by Henry Ripplinger. This book is published by P.O. Books. It's set in 1956 and 1957. And the description on the cover says, an unforgettable, tender-hearted saga of young and lasting love. So here it begins. Henry lunged forward and pressed his nose against the storm door glass as the most beautiful girl he'd ever seen passed by. She captivated him and held him spellbound. His attention drawn to her like a straight pin to a magnet. She must have felt his gaze on her. She stopped and looked towards his door. Her initial quizzical look relaxed and softened into an engaging smile before she turned and strolled away, her hips swaying gently under the warm summer sun. Henry's nose slid along the window pane as he followed her, a thin layer of fog forming on the glass from his breath. He pushed up on his tiptoes to rise above it. As he gazed at her, something powerful stirred deep inside him, turning the boredom he felt all morning into an unexplainable excitement. He followed as far as he could until his head bumped into the doorframe. When she was out of view, Henry lowered himself and took a few deep breaths to slow his racing heart before opening the front door and peeking out. At that precise moment, she stopped and glanced back, her eyes meeting his. Henry gasped, then jumped out of her sight behind the storm door. The momentary embarrassment was more than worth the peek at that winsome creature. Still in a daze, he relived the 30 seconds or so it had taken for her to pass his house. She had come and gone so quickly that he couldn't describe anything more specific than her wheat-colored hair. He needed to know the shape of her lips, the color of her eyes, the complexion of her skin. Did she have any dimples? How did her mouth curl when she spoke? He could only imagine she would be perfect in every way. Henry closed his eyes, pressing his mind to recall more. Her maroon sweater had curved over small breasts, and her black skirt hung just below her knees. Spotless white bobby socks sprung from black and white saddle shoes, and she had carried something in her hand. A piece of paper, perhaps a grocery list? If it was a list, she was probably headed for the corner grocery a little over a block away. His plan to go for a bike ride to kill time while waiting for Timmy Linder to get out of summer school suddenly changed. He just had to get a closer look at this intriguing girl. Henry dashed out the door and scooted between his house and the neighbor's. His shiny red bike, a present for his 15th birthday 2 days before, waited for him. He knelt beside it, fumbling with the lock. "Henry!" Mrs. Guarana called from her garden when she heard him unlock his bike. "Can you carry away the weeds for me?" "Oh, not now!" Henry enjoyed helping his neighbor, but not even the promise of being paid a nickel for the job could distract him from his mission. "Sorry, I have to go to the grocery store, Mrs. Guarana," he answered, desperate to be away. "I'll help you when I get back." Henry flipped the bike around and pushed it to the street. He grabbed the handlebars, stepped on the left pedal, and threw his leg over the seat. His right foot hit the other pedal and slipped off. The bar of the metal bike frame slammed into his groin. A fiery rocket of pain surged through his body as he fell, knocking the breath out of him. Henry crouched over, unable to straighten up. Embarrassed, he glanced around to see if anyone had witnessed the accident. Thankfully, it didn't appear so, but every moment he spent recovering was a moment that kept him from meeting her. Consciously, he inhaled through his nose and out through his mouth to control his breathing, straightening as the pain subsided. He gingerly remounted the leather seat, planted his foot on the pedal, and propelled himself down the street, weaving from side to side, to ease the sting he felt each time his right leg rose on the pedal's upstroke. Hopefully, no one watching would think he was drunk. As he made his way to the grocery, much more slowly than he would have liked, Henry marveled at his bold and impulsive behavior, chasing a girl. He'd had crushes on girls before, but until that morning, he'd always lost his gumption when it came to matters of romance. It wasn't that Henry was particularly shy or uncouth. He had plenty of friends and was generally well-mannered and well-spoken. He just always seemed to lose his cool and ability to speak coherently around pretty girls. But today, something felt different. He didn't know what had gotten into him this morning, but Henry was not only smitten with his new neighbor, he was bound and determined to meet her as soon as possible. And with that thought, despite his aching groin, Henry's feet began to pedal faster and faster, his bike propelling him forward through space so quickly it almost felt like he had wings. Henry had hoped to beat her to the store and meet her at the front door, assuming that was where she was going. But a good 10 minutes had elapsed since his little accident. By the time he arrived at Enkelman's grocery, she was nowhere to be seen. Maybe she was already inside. Or maybe she had taken the trolley that had just pulled away. Or maybe she had gone to Victoria Pharmacy 2 blocks down the other way. Still, he was here now. Better check the grocery first. He set his bike on the walk in front of the stairs, even though he knew Mr. Engelman would holler at him for blocking the entrance. He wouldn't be long. He pulled open the heavy wooden door and was greeted by the pleasant odor of fresh ground coffee. Dust motes hung in the sunlit square of the doorway before it clapped shut behind him. Mr. Engelman was at the counter, serving a customer. Over the years, his regular pace by the till had worn a slight groove into the wood. The store only had 2 aisles, so Henry walked over to the one nearest him and glanced down it. No one. The wooden boards creaked and squeaked as Henry stepped to the other side. It too was empty. "Henry!" He jumped. "Are you looking for the young lady who came in here a few minutes ago?" Henry's face burned. He swung around to face Mr. Engelman, and as he did so, his arm caught the edge of a huge pyramid of salmon tins, sending them rolling and skittering everywhere. Henry wanted to dive through one of the open knotholes in the floor to escape the tide of red surging up from his collar to the top of his head. It was bad enough to have an accident in old man Engelman's store, but for the girl of his dreams to see his clumsiness was another thing entirely. He only hoped that she'd already left and hadn't witnessed his accident. "Sorry, Mr. Engelman," Henry said in a low voice. He knelt down and began gathering the tins. Crawling on all fours, he reached for one on the other side of the aisle, and there she was, squatting in front of him. She picked it up and handed it to him. "Here, can I help you?" Henry looked up. My God, she is beautiful, he thought. The morning sunlight was beaming in the front window behind her, and its glow on her blonde hair gave her a soft halo. It reminded Henry of the painting of the Virgin Mary hanging in his parents' bedroom. Humiliated, he couldn't answer right away. He felt another flush appease on his cheeks and ducked his head. Yes, please help him," Mr. Engelman called from across the store. "Looks like he could use another pair of hands." That broke the tension, and a wave of relief washed over Henry. Trying to be cool, he looked up at the girl again, and this time he smiled. She did not avert her gaze, and he was inordinately pleased. Her sky-blue eyes looked on him with compassion, and her lips curled just enough to let him know she was not laughing at him, though they conveyed a lightheartedness nonetheless. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ears as she leaned towards him to pick up another tin, and Henry smelled lilacs. "Yeah, I could use the help," Henry finally replied with a semblance of composure. He took another can from her hand. "I'm a bit clumsy this morning." Her face broadened, and she handed him more tins. So far, so good, thought Henry. Although he had already managed to make a complete fool out of himself, he had actually managed to smile and speak to a pretty girl. And she had smiled back. He certainly wasn't out of the woods yet. He could still easily blow it like he usually did, but for some reason today felt different. Henry felt different. He was overcome with a sense of assurance that he was doing exactly what he was meant to do. As they crouched, gathering up the tins in silence, Henry studied her covertly, hoping she wouldn't notice. The sunlight continued to dapple and tint her honey-colored hair, and now he noticed that it fell just below her ears. As he reached for a wayward tin, her hair swung forward, hiding most of her facial features except for the tip of her slightly upturned nose. Her neck was long and slender, reminding Henry of Egyptian ladies he had seen in the encyclopedia. Suddenly, she turned to Henry as if to speak, catching him off guard. He didn't have time to pretend he wasn't staring. He'd been caught. Their eyes met now for a second time, and although he felt his face warming again with a blush, this time he couldn't turn away. Her gaze locked with his and his with hers. They rose from their knees simultaneously, as if lifted, and were at once standing facing each other. Nothing existed except this moment and this place. A charged earthly attraction united their hearts, while a spiritual energy traveled the length of the gaze they shared, drawing their souls from their bodies and joining them at the halfway point. The aura around them brightened, enclosing both in the surrounding glow of their celestial connection. Time stood still. Mr. Engelman looked up. "How are you two doing over there?" The sound of his voice pierced the rapture of the moment. Henry caught his breath. His soul slammed back into his chest. "Oh, okay," he answered, though he wasn't sure what the question had been. Heat returned to his cheeks. What in the world was he doing, staring at her like that? She would think he was a nut. He blinked several times as though something were in his eyes. She tilted her head and moved back, then bent down to retrieve the remaining tin cans at their feet. Henry looked at Mr. Engelman, saw him nod in their direction, and wink to the customer he was serving. The pink staining Henry's cheeks deepened to red, his composure crumbling. Whatever confidence he had felt a few moments ago was quickly diminishing. Looking away, Henry placed the last of the collected tins onto the stack. "Guess I should watch where I'm going, huh?" "We all have accidents." Her voice held a gentle humor, erasing his lingering embarrassment. "Thanks for your help. Did you come what you came for?" "No, not everything. I better go ask for help and get back home before they send a search party." As the only other customer in the store gathered up his bag and left, she approached Mr. Engelman. "Hi, could you please show me where the sugar is?" Henry stole another look. She sure didn't need any sweetening. "It's just down this aisle," Mr. Engelman pointed, "at the end on the second shelf." "And the baking soda, where might that be?" "Also with the baking supplies, but on the first shelf." Henry continued straightening the stack of tins, propelled by a yearning he could not suppress. He felt ridiculous. On the one hand, he just wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. But on the other, he was rooted to the spot and seemed to have no control over his actions. It was obvious he was stalling now, but the girl seemed to be stalling too, or so he hoped. By the time she'd found her items and paid for them, Henry's mountain of salmon tins was perfectly stacked. As she strolled toward the door, taking her time and looking at everything along the way, Henry sprinted to the front. "Henry," Mr. Engelman called, "what did you come in for? Were you supposed to pick something up?" Henry froze. Of course! The girl was probably wondering the same thing. He didn't want to let on his real reason for being there. Silently, he begged the girl to wait for him. He turned and spotted several loaves of wrapped bread, lined up neatly on the paint chip shelf. He snatched one up. "Please put it on our account," Henry said as he dashed to join the girl lingering by the door. "Don't you want a bag?" No, this is fine. I'm really sorry for being so clumsy." "It's okay, Henry." Mr. Engelman leaned forward to rest his hands on the counter. "I think I stacked the tins out too far in the aisle. Not to worry." Henry nodded towards Mr. Engelman and at once turned back to the girl. She seemed to be holding back a chuckle, which then turned into a wide, warm smile. He dashed past her, opened the heavy door, and held it for her. She cast him a furtive glance, then looked down, her cheeks faintly tinged with pink. Henry's heart skipped a beat. Together they walked down the 2 steps to the pavement. The bike Henry had dreamed of and hoped for and had been so happy to get only 2 days before blocked the path. Henry did the unthinkable. He stepped over his longed-for birthday gift as if it were a discarded candy wrapper and walked on in step with the girl. Just then she turned to him, her crystal blue eyes sparkling, and made Henry's day. "By the way, I'm Jenny Sarsky. We just moved into the neighborhood a few days ago." Thrilled that she had freely offered her name and relieved that she didn't think he was a complete moron, he hoped, he blurted, "I know, I live just 3 doors down from you. I watched the movers unload your stuff." As soon as the words tumbled out, Henry wished he had them back. Geez, there I go again. Now she would know he'd been spying on her. But Jenny didn't seem to notice. "This is our 3rd move in 4 years. I hope we stay longer than the last time." Henry silently echoed that sentiment. "We were just settling into our house in Vancouver when someone got sick and they called my dad to move here to Regina to take his place. He said we had to go. It was such a great opportunity." Her eyes turned toward Henry and they stepped off the curb in unison. "So, here we are." After a brief pause, she added, "I'm sure you're not interested in this." "Oh, yes," Henry responded. He would have been interested in hearing her recite the phone book. But Henry couldn't believe that this gorgeous girl could possibly be interested in him. Just when his heart began filling with doubt and despair, Jenny jumped as a passing car honked its horn. Neither of them had been paying very close attention, and they had just about stepped directly onto Victoria Avenue without even noticing the traffic. Henry caught her eye and they shared a startled chuckle. Crossing Victoria Avenue was always dangerous. Cars zipped by in a steady stream in both directions. As they waited for the opportunity to cross, Henry noted the sky was clear, not a cloud in sight. Somewhere beneath the zenith and the horizon was a shade of blue that matched the color of Jenny's eyes. He smiled and stole another look at her. The wind gently lifted her hair, exposing the silver stud in her ear, the light glinting off the silver chain she wore around her neck. Standing next to Jenny on that perfect summer morning, Henry quickly forgot the anguish he had felt just a moment ago and was suddenly flooded with hopeful anticipation. Finally, a break in traffic allowed them to dart into the street. "Quickly, hold my hand," Jenny blurted. He didn't know if she'd asked because the traffic frightened her or if she just wanted to hold his hand. It didn't matter. He thrust his hand out and grabbed hers, and all heaven broke loose. An electrifying thrill charged through him. Warm and soft, her hand fit perfectly into his. The sound of traffic faded in the distance. The sun shone like it never had before. The world marched on without them. Oblivious to cars and traffic, Henry glided blindly across the avenue, unsure if his feet even touched the pavement. The curb arrived a second or two sooner than he expected. Henry stumbled, tearing their hands apart, and snapped him out of his reverie. He struggled to regain his balance and composure. "You really are having a rough time today," Jenny ribbed him good-naturedly. "I was paying so much attention to the traffic, I didn't see the curb," Henry grasped for a reasonable excuse. "They should have traffic lights or a crosswalk at this corner," Jenny observed. "Yeah, you're right." As they walked towards home, Henry shifted the loaf of bread from the hand nearest hers to the other. He wanted to touch her hand again so badly, he brushed her free hand against hers. Inching his way towards hers, his hand finally hit its mark. A warm sensation shot through him as their fingers met. Jenny stepped away. "Sorry," Henry lied as he moved over a bit to give her a little more space. Pretending it was an accident. They were nearing home and Henry wondered if he should walk her to her door or if that would be awkward. Without thinking, but immediately wishing he hadn't, he blurted, "Do you want me to walk you home?" "I think I can find the way," she laughed. And that's where I'm going to stop today. So again, that's Pewter Angels, written by Henry K. Ripplinger. This book can be found on the Saskatoon Public Library digital library as an ebook and an audiobook. So if it was interesting to you and you'd like to find out what happens in this story, please feel free to find it at saskatoonlibrary.ca. Thank you. Have a great day.